Periodically I receive written inquiries from people who have seen some of these tapes, read something I wrote, or based upon what they imagine I might be up to. A particular part of the inquiries that I refer to have to do with questions that they present, such as this. They will mention normally someone contemporary, a songwriter, some group, a writer, usually someone in the arts. And oftentimes they'll refer to a particular song, to a particular piece that someone has written that in some way seems to have some parallel to something that they think I have said or wrote. Then their question is this: is this person to whom they refer up to something? All right, that's a fair question. It pops up in a sizable amount once or twice a year. Is this person up to something? The answer is this: is everyone is up to something. It is also safe to assume that all of you at one time or the other believed that someone that you had run across, very likely not personally, because it makes it easier if you simply heard their music, read what they wrote, that there was someone that you believed was up to something. Everyone is up to something. But it has a catch. Surprise, surprise. The catch is this: that no ordinary person can comprehend directly their own behavior, which includes what they say, what they might write as a song. One aspect of this beginning to show itself at the ordinary level that I could point to with specific vigor, if not intent, or intent if not vigor, would be what psychology and psychiatry have attempted to limn even more to support the absolute existence of, quote, compulsive behavior. As a rule, in clinical or pathological psychology, of course, they refer to compulsive behavior as that which seems to the people involved to be less than profitable, self-defeating. But at the ordinary level, all behavior is compulsive. And to take an example of a musical artist, a performer of some kind, who writes a piece of music, who writes a piece of poetry, who writes a play that has parts of it that seem to be directly talking, you assume, about higher possibilities, about other states of awareness. And as I said, the most captious possibilities to people who write me, of course, are examples wherein they think that the person is talking and using the same kinds of terminology that I'm using. And so therefore, are they involved in some sort of secret activity that the public is not generally aware of? Are they up to something? And I tell you again, everybody is up to something. But if they are ordinary, which we're only leaving a few people left on this planet, then what they may be saying, what they may be singing, what they may be acting out, what they may be painting is compulsive behavior. And therefore they can have, and they include you at line level consciousness, is they can have no direct perception or understanding of what they're talking about. A place wherein you would find an exception for a few people, which is another way to describe part of the progress of someone involved with this, as you can find, or if you can find, through your own experience, a place where there is a tolerance in the machine. And here it would take on significance in that you could use tolerance, or I am using tolerance, in two ways. One of the ways being that a physical piece of machinery cannot operate unless there is a degree of tolerance in the machine. There cannot be perfect fits, etc., between gears. For one example, there has to be a kind of tolerance for the machine to operate. The other way in which I am using the word is on a more humane level, that unless you can find and then live a kind of tolerance between where you were wired up and plugged into this vitas machina, then you will always be so close to it. It will always be a form of compulsive behavior, and no matter how you talk, no matter what you write, no matter what songs you might conjure up based upon what you think I've said or someone else said, you will never be able to directly comprehend your behavior, including what you think, including what you wrote, that may have attracted other people, that may have said only a more enlightened person could have written this song. Unless there was enough tolerance to what may have started out as a kind of compulsive behavior, that is, you writing this, it just flowed out. The old story that many so-called artistic people fall back on of saying it's a gift from the gods. I pointed out to you one time that if they knew what they were talking about, and if they would change the time zone of gods and bring it up to date, they're closer to telling the truth than someone who tries to ascribe to themselves near eons of contemplation and pondering and study that led up to them being able to produce this small work of art. They would be closer telling the truth if they could bring it up to date to say, I don't know, it's a gift from the gods. Sometimes I sit down with the paints, and this is what comes out. Sometimes I sit down at the piano, nothing happens, and again I can sit down, and in an hour's time I can write a complete symphony. It may start out as compulsive behavior. It may be the kinds of things that you are wired up to be involved with in life, whether it be the arts, could be carpentry, could be any number of things. But the belief that someone else or you is, quote, up to something, that is, up to something on the basis that they know what they're doing, all you've got to do is get to the point that most of you should have had a brushing acquaintance with, a fender bender with by now, to realize that as a whole, up until now, you don't understand what you did. You don't understand why you did it, if there is a why, but you certainly do not comprehend what's involved. Notwithstanding any mechanical fallback position that the partnership may have, of you falling back to line level consciousness, still trying to entertain the notions that, all right, there are obviously subconscious dynamics at work here that make me operate sometimes in a fairly compulsive manner. And I'm fairly sure that it goes back somewhere to my childhood, to my mother, my father, the church, the culture, my economic position. But if you have had even skirmish enough to scrape some of the paint off your front bumpers or fenders, all of you have a passing personal surety that there are no such dynamics. Things simply happen. It might as well, if you're going to entertain ordinary psychological terminology, you might as well go ahead and include everything up until the point that you can affect line level consciousness. You might as well call it all compulsive behavior. Don't limit it to simply case histories of people who have to wash their hands every 30 minutes, or believe that there's bugs on them all the time, or they're always hearing the phone ring. So the question about is some person out in life onto something. Everybody is onto something. If you could take everybody, which you wouldn't have to, but we'll keep it within the easy realms of chip terminology, binary terminology. But if we took everyone and melted them down and put them together, you must see that we'd have all possibilities. Whatever term that you would like that seems to encompass some kind of superior understanding, a more enlightened person, a more awakened person, a more godly, a superior person, then that's what you would have. But not on the basis that any of the individuals still driven by compulsive behavior, that is, anyone still operating at line level consciousness, that is, anyone who is ordinary, that is, almost everybody on this planet, almost all the time, are not onto anything. Because as long as you are face to face with, as long as your part in this living machine is so close that the matter of tolerance cannot even be defined by you, that everything that seems to happen around you, well, it still seems that there is an out there, that everything that seems to happen has an immediate, predictable, inescapable effect on you, then you seem to have ended up in a place in the machine wherein everything that you do seems to have an immediate, inescapable, irreversible effect on others around you. There seems to be these old kinds of circular games that psychology talks about. It seems to be a kind of bilateral compulsive behavior. You simply must face the fact, since you've already been there, most of you simply need to face the fact that there is no understanding until you have a kind of tolerance, until there is a kind of quite physical distance, which I could also say distance slice time, but a kind of distance between you and what would be the pinch rollers, the gears, the pulleys between you and all mechanical behavior, between you and all compulsive behavior, until there is a kind of tolerance, a continuing tolerance, that the same things happen apparently out there that should be happening to you in your position. People you're with now, the people you're attracted to, family that you can't get away from, the kinds of occupations and hobbies you seem to have ended up in bed with, that the effects that they seem to have on you, there has to be a kind of tolerance, there has to be a kind of distance. And according to your own understanding, you can look at it as time or space. I've talked in the past numerous times about the idea of time and what it takes the system to molecularly take in what seems to happen out here. That there is a lag mechanically, and then you can specifically, through the kinds of tasks I have given in the past, you can specifically alter that time. You can interfere and give yourself more time between it. You can do that. And looked at in another sense of the word, tolerance would be a real trilateral, triaxial, living realization of what ordinary dictionaries refer to as tolerance, of a continuing triaxial understanding that everybody else, as far as you can see, I shouldn't keep giving you a way out because then you do see, that everybody else is involved with compulsive behavior, no matter what they talk about. The few that you might ever see who are not engaged in it, you can recognize. But I assure you, you will not have to carry around a little notebook writing down the names of the people you recognize in life so that you can keep them straight. I give you my word, you won't need any memory aids to help you remember who it was. So let's look at it on the easy side, that you see that everybody is involved with compulsive behavior. Those who talk like you think someone onto something would talk. Or someone who writes as though you think someone who was onto something would write. You understand it's compulsive behavior. They cannot help it any more than somebody sitting in the bleachers in Chicago can keep from screaming out, "Murder the bum," "Bring on you pitcher," "2 beers over here, garçon." I do not say this to belittle anyone's heroes in life. I do not say this to discourage you from listening to music, looking at paintings, reading poetry. But any of you who still are harboring, notions, they're just useless is the only reason I'm going into it. They're distractions, which distractions are all right. You can look at distractions as a kind of horizontal hobby, but do not expect more out of distractions. Do not expect slugs to be able to tap dance. There is more to this, and I have mentioned it once or twice in the past with a very glancing blow, and it seemed to have had no immediate effect, but I'll mention it again. Once you can get your consciousness, once you get this whole system that seems to be you individually, once it goes through a kind of shakedown cruise, once it goes through a kind of basic training for a division of the armed forces that even has no insignia and has no flag, you do not have any heroes. There are no heroes, and I do not say that in a braggadissimo manner. I do not say that in some way to say that I am king of the mountain and I look down on everybody in the world. Any binary verbal interpretation you make of that is a mistake. And the reason I brought it up in the past and the reason I bring it up now is fairly subtle, and it's not something I can prove to any of you that's of any importance until you feel it yourself. When you're operating at line level consciousness, when you seem to be operating on my old cross, that there is a linear string of causes and effects going on from the past into here and into the future, you're operating on the basis of a kind of hero worship. No matter what you say, you could argue my words, but all you've got to do is have applied yourself to some serious degree with the kind of task I have given just in the last 12 months. To realize that this partnership, the voice that talks to you, the voice that you by and large take as being you, the one that seems to counsel you, the one you seem to want to debate with, the one that points out things you like, and hey, they just mentioned so-and-so is going to be on television, hey, so-and-so has a new book. It is a form of hero worship going on. Whether it's back to some religious prophet of your forefathers, some religious prophet you picked up in college while rebelling against your forefathers' religion, some so-called guru going on now, some sports figure, or some pop star that seems to consistently write songs that really sticks its tongue out at the world in a literate fashion, in a poetic manner. There is a non-ending stream of hero worship in everybody, and you need to see it. It's not any sort of weakness. I am aware of the fact that the way I'm describing it is, in a sense, truer on a binary level with men, the way I'm describing it, than it is with women. But I'm going to give women credit to being able to apply this a little to themselves, and a whole lot for them to see what they should have, what they've seen perhaps writing words all their life about the good old macho crowd. But there is a continuing string of hero worship going on. Whether your partnership continually identifies by name some person, some sports figure, some religious writer, that doesn't matter. It's the feeling always, as part of being dissatisfied, as part of being unfinished, that I should be better, I should be more like so-and-so. Even if you don't have a name, it could be just almost a nonverbal picture of I should have been about 6'5", about 6 inches bigger in the chest, 3 inches smaller in the waist. My nose should have been straight, my hair should have been black and wavy. And if I could just sing, if I had real talent, if I was sure of myself, well, hell, if I looked like that, I'd be sure of myself. But if I had that, and then I had a little talent of some kind, I could just walk into a bar, in a piano bar, and suddenly say, can you do feelings? And suddenly, even saying feelings and people enjoy it. I mean, that good. That is a kind of hero worship. when I say that anyone who has any real understanding, this would be a test if you needed a test. I'm still trying to get my finger a place that you'll follow it for a second that is very subtle and it's over in the shadows. But when you understand anything, when you can be conscious to any continuing degree above the line, there are no heroes. And that is not a negative statement. It doesn't mean that you suddenly become so smart that you realize that all the world's heroes have cleat of faith. Is that it? Hearts of stone. Feet of clay. It's not to try and in some way destroy the pleasant illusions of life. I'm telling you, it is much more subtle that there are no heroes. And I'm going to leave it again, but I'm telling you, I'm not saying that as some kind of statement as an attack. I'm not telling you that to try and shake your little brains away from believing in Superman and Santa Claus and Jesus Christ. I'll leave it trying one more time with a hint that I can bring this up several times, and I tell you it's not as simple as it appears on the surface. Try it from another angle. Reverse what I said. But there are no heroes if you understand anything. Back to what I was going to say a little more about the kind of tolerance that only a few people, life only needs a few people to be able to distance themselves. That if you are wired up, you are plugged into the living machinery of life, your place in the body of life is such that there is a kind of tolerance to this degree. You can change that tolerance. You can change it in the ways that I have given you tasks before. I've one time even announced it as a kind of trick, but a slowing down of the reaction time, which seems simple enough if you've got any ability. People believe they can control themselves at all. It's the kind of task I've given in the past, to just do it for 5 minutes at a certain time of day, 3 days next week. That what goes on, slow down your reaction time. And it doesn't matter what your reaction time is, and it doesn't matter how much you slow it down. As long as you follow what I said, that you slow it down. That is, you did it enough that you're aware that, hey, I slowed it down. It doesn't matter about how many kilometers per hour you slowed it down. You slowed it down. What you have done then, if this was the original tolerance, it's like you have changed the tolerance to this. You are no longer driven at the same tempo. You're no longer driven with the same intensity by what seems to be going on out there, that what seems to be going on in the bowels of this living machine. Then the other kind of tolerance is what I mentioned would be, in an additional dimension, the reality of the ordinary use of the word tolerance. Saying that someone is tolerant of other people's opinions. Then his original tolerance perhaps was more than the person making the statement. That so-and-so can hear a negative religious joke and not get all upset against his own religion. And I hear one just get started. I can hear it coming, and I begin to bite my tongue. I can't help it. The man's more tolerant. Or I know that he is a conservative, of a conservative political bent, but he can hear conflicting opinions of some kind, and he doesn't get all that mad with the people. And I can hear someone start espousing that kind of political rhetoric, and my blood begins to boil. All right, that's from one viewpoint of someone referring to someone else as being more tolerant. You should know the limitations of that. You should understand that that is compulsive behavior within itself. It would be, I guess, a mechanically run adding machine being given credit for being more tolerant by an electric adding machine. That every time somebody punches his buttons and has to pull that handle, it takes him longer to make a noise. Whereas somebody hits me and I immediately go zing. We're talking about relative compulsive behavior. But real tolerance would be based upon understanding that those around you have no tolerance. By you understanding that at my own level, left where I was when I was born and raised, left where I was, I had no tolerance. If I could go back there completely now, we don't have to worry about whether I'm human or not. I can redefine the grand descriptions of being all too human. So the tolerance is based upon an additional dimension. It is not compulsive behavior. You cannot be tolerant in a mechanical way. You can be called tolerant in a mechanical way, in the same way that someone who just composed some rock song about tolerance, someone can say, hey, this person's got to be onto something, or they could not have written that. All of you should know, without me having to go into any further descriptions, that at a binary level, a tolerant person is only tolerant in a relative way. All you got to do is push him a little further, and he's not tolerant. All you got to do is accuse him of being I hear you're a tolerant person. I've been watching you. You're as intolerant as anybody else. There's nothing tolerant about you. I'll tell you what it is. It's ignorance passing for tolerance. You don't know any better. It'll take a good, 60, 90 seconds, and you can make a tolerant person punch you in the nose. That is a binarily tolerant person. Paragraph 2. The continuing question of what more can I do? People here, people in other places, people that's been exposed to this for 2 hours, for 2 months, for 2 years, proclaiming to themselves and to me that, by God, I'm in this for life. I hear it. This is what I've been looking for, and I just feel, I'm just sure, I'm just positive that you probably know what you're doing, that you probably know what I'm looking for. And I believe I've already had an experience. Now, I'm not going to say mystical because I know you make fun of that, but by God, I've had an experience. And to use your terminology, I think my nervous system got ignited to higher levels, and I just know, without any doubt, that this is it, comma, or period. But I can't keep it going. Since it seems so great, and since it seems like you're the source of it, I'm giving you credit for it. Come on, tell me, what can I do? I've already had a taste of it. I like it. I want it. That's it. You win. I give up. Now tell me, how do I get it? How can I keep it? Description number what? 127.297. Subsection, never mind. What I have been describing as neuralizing. My most apparent hardwired description being the ability to remember something without thinking about it. But those who believe that they have certainly had enough experience, that there is no doubt, whether they seem to have broken all their bad habits, but there seems to be no doubt up here from what they have experienced, that this is it and I gotta have it. And if you know enough that you told me this to start with, by God, how come you can't tell me how to keep it up? I told you, I'll give you everything I got. Of course, that's always safe for people who don't have anything. But hell, I'll give you anything I got. I'll give you credit. I'll give you credit for telling me about it. So how come I can't keep it up? You should be striving, those of you in the position I have been describing for the last couple of minutes, you should be striving to make this word neuralize, the reality behind it, to resemble what would be your ordinary state of yellow circuit awareness. Now, some weeks back, even though I haven't mentioned it since that time, I told you that there is really an absolute response I can make to all such questions after I described about how to balance the line physically in yourself. And then try, once that is held in balance and you can feel that non-existent triangle based on the line across the pelvic area that I drew for you, that you can actually feel it. And then try to hold right here, that level of consciousness is to hold it in plumb, and then to continually make it scan. That is the brother-in-law of neuralizing. And it seems to be more than a yellow circuit activity because it requires a constant attention, a constant awareness to what seems to be the physical in man, in you. But the result of striving to keep this condition so it becomes, so that it resembles at least your ordinary state of yellow circuit awareness, is then apparently things begin to speak. A phrase came to me, and I believe that I am lifting that phrase, seems like from some Greek philosopher, about things when you're in a mystical state, or when you're in the hands of the gods, when you have won their favor, or when you are a true, capital P, philosopher, that things speak to you. The kinds of maps and descriptions that I draw out at times, I could ask the question, hey, what can the few actually get from this mechanical noise, rumblings, backfires, repetitious sounds that life makes? What could the few get from this? Nothing? What could the few get from this? Probably nothing. That's wrong. If you're only listening with two ears, if you're only listening with binary consciousness to the noises, to what life is saying through people, they're speaking based upon binary consciousness, and if you're listening, you never hear anything new. All you hear is repetition. But if you can listen beyond your own binary consciousness, things do speak. But let me refine the term. I do not mean simply the kinds of apparently mystical experiences that have been written about throughout the ages. People saying that things spoke to me, trees spoke to me of how they were the loving servants of our benevolent gods. The sky spoke to me of the limitless possibilities of the human spirit. The little waters and the fishes spoke to me, blah, blah, blah. What appears in the kinds of maps and the kind of activity I'm doing, that you people, to some degree, have no choice except to stumble along until you find your own way to follow this. On the contrary, it seems to spark an internal speaking as opposed to apparently out there of things speaking. That is, that apparently it is almost like yellow flashes. It's not simply a tree, the clouds, or the feeling that I looked upon the face of humanity and humanity hollered out, "Help me, I'm bored. Help me, life is standing on my pecker, my foot." As opposed to that, which is the classical way of the philosophers and would-be mystics saying, things spoke to me. People spoke to me without knowing it. I heard the heartbeat of the gods coming through the poor, the hungry, even those who lived in New York. As opposed to that, if you will note, at our time and our place, you being wired up to get entangled with me, it is more if we were still operating on this binary description that there appears to be an internal you and then an external out there. To me saying that things begin to speak to you, it's more your understanding, it's more your perception that what's going on out here is not necessarily a tree talking to you or the human spirit coming out of some mass collection of human faces or even an individual. It's this internal, secret, private affair that it's as though someone has thrown a neural hand grenade into my brain. And I just heard what they said, but that's not what they said. I just heard the description of the news of what occurred at such and such place, and that occurred all right. That occurred in the same way that shadows follow the wolf man. But you're not going to get much of a perception of the joys, the benefits, the heartbreak of the wolf man by watching his shadow. Or you won't learn much about the act of sex watching the shadows of people do it. There has to be an adequate, dimensionally speaking, perception, if not participation, but perception of what is going on. That, I'm suggesting to you, is the up-to-date version of things speaking to you. It takes the tolerance. You have to be able to get away from your own mechanical behavior. Then that has to bring about its own side effect of you being tolerant. It is not through something that you have earned. It is not through a continual striving that I'm going to be tolerant, I'm going to practice. That every time somebody says a kind of buzzword about some group or some person I don't like, I'll try to be tolerant. Like everything else, in the true triaxial world of this, trying doesn't count. That's not even down to, what's the third? The bronze medal. They don't award any medals in this for trying. Seekers are failures. People who try with all their might. People who die and they put on their tombstone, she tried. That's what they put in the 2D world. If they wanted a real epitaph, if they wanted me to put the real one, it would be, she failed. That's only from the viewpoint of attempting this. As long as you're engaged in compulsive behavior, as long as you're playing out your ordinary role in life, then everyone on their tombstone will be proclaimed a success. Nebraska's greatest 20th century axe murderer, so-and-so. The Twin Cities' biggest loser, so-and-so, married, divorced 27 times. Paid alimony, outstripped the entire state budget for Minnesota. All of these people are successes. It is only the binary mind that would say, so-and-so has succeeded and so-and-so has failed. You cannot attempt to be tolerant. You cannot attempt to love everyone else. You cannot attempt to be a better person unless you're satisfied to engage for the rest of your life in compulsive behavior. Part of compulsive behavior, part of being ordinary, part of being in the position to believe that everybody may be onto something, is that we do try. I try, I fail. That's it. That, within itself, is success. Whatever you are wired up to attempt to do, you're not going to do it to satisfy you. All of you know that by now. The whole world, life talks to through ordinary people. It says this over and over. The richest man in the world, he's still not rich enough. The most famous artist in the world goes, ah, pshaw. You should see me. I'm not really that good. Man who just won the Critics Award for a new play. Says, hey, compared to Shakespeare, I'm dog stuff. Everybody, and it's not some sham, as you should know by now, of so-called humility. That's the way life is wired up to be. If you don't like the examples I just tried to make up, look at yourself. All somebody has to do is say, boy, I saw that cabinet you built. I saw that car you painted. I saw something you did. And immediately, I guess it's just compulsive behavior, I don't know. But think back. What do you say immediately? As you go, oh, shit, that wasn't anything. Well, they had me doing that. I had been up 2 days. I had the flu. I had a hangnail. I used to be better at this. I'm getting old. That is success on a binary level. I have warned you that in the reality of a trinary existence, even here, only a few people can survive it. Because where are you going to turn? How do you know if you're succeeding or not? You will. But playing the game with you now in words, if not blue and yellow flashes, how are you going to know that you're succeeding? I repeat, you will know. But playing the game now, how will you know? The only way to be tolerant is to find and then create a way in which there is tolerance in your position in the machine, in any and all possible ways. But as long as you continue to move at the same speed as you always have, to find yourself in the same kind of, to whatever degree, of intense confrontation with life in whatever aspects, you'll never be tolerant. And when you die, all your friends will say he or she was a failure, but you succeeded. To move it up to the other level, there is nothing to say. There are no world of heroes, and there are no ways to describe whether you have succeeded or failed. No one else can see it. Let's see if I can put raisins or roaches into tonight's cupcake. Since most people can't tell the difference anyway. I have not changed the subject as much as it may sound at first, from what I just got through talking about. Everybody needs an enemy. Those of you who have been exposed to me talking and writing for a period of time are aware that I have pointed out that there is a kind of all-around general tension, hostility, anger, all sorts of words to call it. But it's a kind of tensile strength. It's the blush in life's little cheekies. But it's a kind of tension between people. It goes under many names, all the way from love to hatred. But it is a kind of tension. And I have pointed out to you very correctly, if the few people attempting to do this, you cannot continue to find your place in the machine with the same kind of tension that you have always felt between you, specific people, between you and the feeling of out there in general. In other words, you cannot be some kind of hostile motherfucker and expect to accomplish anything along these lines. Now, I assume that everybody has their own opinion, their own acceptance that I have made that clear enough, especially by being able to say motherfucker and try and get somebody's attention, except I guess I've overdone it. But to try and up the stakes a little bit, let me point out something very seriously, is everybody needs an enemy. That is really a triaxial statement at the binary level. And the world as it seems to be, to ordinary consciousness, a more truthful description is everyone requires an enemy. This is within the realm that I generally have included under speaking of these kinds of three forces, these kinds of three possibilities that are always extant, always required for anything to happen that man can be conscious of, even in this digital manner. That there are always three forces, sets of forces in operation. That nothing happens without some opposition. This is not limited in some way to mass movements of humanity, of cultures, of religions, of nations. It's not just the weather. It's not simply the strange occurrences at the subparticle level. It is true with each individual. Everybody requires an enemy. Everybody's got an enemy. But when you move it to the point, let's assume that some of you got to the point that you had your own continuing understanding and that you no longer were dealing on the binary basis of everyone requires an enemy. Let us say, to put it into foolish verbal terminology, that you had reached the point that you were almost a saint, that you had such tolerance that you did not hate people, you did not react negatively to what other people did, you simply understood that things are as they are, and you saw why they need to be that way, and you saw the benefit. You saw that for every building, something else must be raised. Trees must be cut down. Animals must be run off the land. For everything that appears to be a destructive act to binary vision, it can be seen as simply one leg of a new triad, whereas there's something constructive. On the personal level, everybody needs an opposition. Everybody needs a D force. They're required. And it comes on the basis of an enemy. Now, you do have to reach a kind of point that you're almost a saint. Now, that's just a word, and that's just a binary description. But it is the way in which your own system is shaken up through these strange activities, and before you know it, it has, as you would call it now, physiologically changed to wherein, let us say, that you can no longer eat certain kinds of food physically. You can no longer put certain substances in your body. The same way you can no longer be a converter, be an acceptor for a certain kind of energy, oftentimes referred to as hatred, anger, intolerance, prejudice. So let's say that you've reached that point. That you would think that from one viewpoint at least, you would be walking along the same kinds of heroic paths as the Buddha, as Confucius, as Rabbi O'Herlihy. But notice, even if we take the historic examples that the ordinary world offers of Jesus, Moses, do you realize, oh, you well-read people, when it comes to having enemies, those suckers had enemies. They didn't have some person in your apartment complex that keeps raising hell about you taking their parking place or playing the cereal too loud. We're talking about serious enemies. In fact, if I take the ordinary horizontal story of some of these so-called prophets and religious people and extraordinary men, I can point out to you that some of them, I don't know, I just thought about this, but what the hell, I'll go ahead and say it. Some of them, it would almost appear, went out of their way looking for an enemy. My pensive pose. Weren't they about to turn Socrates loose? Didn't they do everything but say, hey? Just nod when we tell you to nod. When they say, are you sorry you did it? Go, and we'll all be out drinking an hour later. You know what did he do? He pissed everybody off. Moses? Him and the pharaohs? I just take the stories as presented. The man could have walked away clean. It might have cost a few bucks. He might have had to make a few verbal agreements that meant nothing. And look what happened. Jesus, just sort of a variation of the Socrates story. They did everything but just grab his head and say, all right, when he asks you, are you sorry you did it? We're going to shake your head. You don't have to do it. Just relax and we'll shake your head and we'll all go home. And it's as though the guy tensed up and refused. He wouldn't even do that. And of course, Muhammad, talk about looking for an enemy. In a peak of boredom, he says, hey, why don't we go conquer the world? We'll go out and we'll enlighten everybody, and those we don't enlighten, we'll kill. So even though the population goes down, think what fine contemporaries and neighbors we'll have. Back to the level at which everyone seems to be operating, the ordinary level, the level at which you would be operating if you're just going by compulsive line level behavior. You ought to take this as a personal task, even though I wasn't going to make it into anything specific, and to see. I can already tell many of you already had your immediate glimpses when I put it into words, but everybody, you and everyone else, requires an enemy. And I say, of course, an enemy. It can be more. But everybody has a good enemy. Everybody. And if you've moved away from the enemy, or if he died or she died, you keep picking up variations of that enemy, perhaps. But there's always somebody who is rubbing you the wrong way, to say the very least. And I can stand here and say things about somebody complaining in your apartment complex about the stereo, and some of you laugh like, oh, ha, ha. You know how funny that is compared to the trials and tribulations of Moses and all these people. But it's not funny when you're involved with it, when your tolerance in the machine is only this much, and after a hard day, and you go home and you turn the stereo and sit back and get yourself a glass of iced tea and try to relax, and for the 27th time in the last 3 weeks, there's a knock on the door, and it's Friday, everybody's got it turned up, it's not that loud, it is not funny. And it's the same person doing it, and that's serious. At line level, it's supposed to be serious. That person is an enemy. And you're an idiot if you don't understand by now, if you can't receive clearly and then perceive it yourself, that the partnership quite easily speaks of murder or destroying their car, sugar, potato slices down in the gas tank, or trash their apartment when they're gone. You know, enough's enough. You got a right to live. And then, of course, there seems to be a more on the basis of a kind of background radiation noise of enemies you've had. It might be your mother, your father, some relative, some situation, some camp, some religious figure. But there's going to be a kind of background radiation that makes noises when, if you correctly look back in your own nervous system past when I say about an enemy, that there's some more back there. But continually, and you look around, everybody else has an enemy. Now let me again move it from that level into another level. And to some of you, it may appear to be theoretical for the present time. But let me speak about not the requirement for an enemy, but that if you were somewhere closer to having a new state of yellow circuit awareness, it's not simply a requirement of an enemy, because you could very easily be past that. But then it gets to be a matter of the need for an enemy. This is not as theoretical as it may sound. If it was in some way just theoretical, if we were ordinary people and I was saying, here's how it would be when you die and go to my paradise. We're talking about what is not only around the corner for many of you people, but again, it is a subtle reality that's almost lingering in the shadows right now. So don't take it as being something theoretical, totally. And that is not the requirement, not the mechanical requirement for an enemy, but if you're following what I was putting into linear, apparently linear binary terminology, getting somewhere past the point of this mechanical need, the requirement for an enemy that ordinary people have, that everyone has, the mechanical need for a D force in your life, in every aspect of anything that is going to become viable. There has to be an opposition to it. And in many, many cases, you can see quite clearly that it manifests itself apparently in a specific mortal enemy. But let's say that you have in some way, in my linear description, gotten past that point. There's no longer just the requirement for that, and then you got the point where I have no enemies. I see that, even though I see there are people who think they're my enemy. There are people who think they hate me. There are people who think that I hate them in return. I see it all. Now we're moving to another level that is not as theoretical as it may sound. It is not somewhere simply in your possible future. This third level would be, let's say, that here you stand, if this was possible. Here you stand without the requirement for an enemy, that you have no enemies, no matter what your apparent enemies think. You have none. Now I must tell you that it goes past the point of an enemy being required, then you need one. And that was why I was slipping up in a sense. I was making up the jokes, ha ha ha, about Moses and Jesus and Muhammad, Confucius. I assume you've all read as much as I have, that all of them ended up with a share of serious enemies. All right, there should be a question somewhere besides my apparent humor at times, is if these people, be they real binarily or real even better than that these people whose names I have pulled from life's mouth as they have been remembered, if these people understood that much, if these people were so great, how in the hell did Jesus end up in this mess? How did Confucius end up with the warlords, the very ones that he knew would strike him down? How'd he ended up sticking his tongue out at them? I mean, even you would know better than that. How did these people, how did they get in such a position? Of course, I assume have to stop here for long and point out to you how religions, how still compulsive mechanical aspects of life's nervous system explains it to everyone else, attempts to explain what happened. I'll assume that all of you are beyond that point. I'm just pointing out to you that there could be a serious question if you looked at in a certain, very cold and direct manner, is if these people are all that great, how in the hell did they end up in that kind of position? I mean, me, ordinarily, me with my phony baloney brain, I could have gotten out of that. That wouldn't have happened to me. They would have said, hey, admit you were wrong, and that's the end of it, we'll all go home. I'd say, hey, wrong? You're looking at Mr. Wrong. And they'd say, case dismissed, not how drinks are on me, right? It would certainly appear that there would be some validity to that approach, that at least it would have saved your little life, that it gave you another day, another decade to have great thoughts and even become more enlightened, right? With no foe, there is no action. With no foe, there is no necessary contact with life. I said it was not as theoretical as some of you might believe. Some of you, and it's not as two-dimensionally describable as it sounds, but some of you continue to hang around a place on the side of the road that you have reached, wherein most of the time you're living in a kind of time zone wherein you don't feel a great affinity, a kind of great mechanical contact with your erstwhile enemies. That by and large you do not feel the kind of hatred that you did for your father before you started this. You do not feel a kind of automatic hostility towards some group of people that you believe abused you. Just people that seem to individually have the immediate ability to make you angry, no matter what they say, just their mere presence, their existence, that now you no longer react to it in that way. Some of you now want to ask me, you want to describe it, even you in the partnership get involved with believing, well, I've almost reached a point that if I'm not truly enlightened, I'm so much out of the dark that it's almost boring. What now? You have got to have an enemy. If your nervous system had progressed to the point that was the highest on this planet in this time zone, that is right now, you have got to have an enemy. But it reaches a point that it's no longer required, just in your case, it's no longer required that you have one, and that through your own efforts, not necessarily knowing what you were doing at the time, but through your own efforts, you have passed the point of requiring an enemy to be there. You have got to have an enemy. But it reaches a point that it's no longer required, just in your case, it's no longer required that you have one, and that through your own efforts, not necessarily knowing what you were doing at the time, but through your own efforts, you have passed the point of requiring an enemy to be there. But then there comes a point after that that you need an enemy. There is always an enemy present. Having said that, I wonder what I meant. Okay, I got it. Don't toy with me. If I said it, I can follow up on it. Yes, sir, I got it for sure. I think for sure I've got it. Myself. The partnership. There is always me to hate. There is always me to apologize for. There is always me to discount. Now, at the ordinary binary level, an ordinary person would not even have to look any further, although their enemies would not be limited to that necessarily. But they would not really, in the true triaxial existence of things, the phenomenon of man here in the last body, they would not have to look any further. You always have an enemy at that level. My compulsive behavior, my uncontrollable id, my deep, dank subconscious, my terrible childhood, my uncontrollable temper, my aggression toward women, my general dislike for everybody, my laziness, try and neuralize properly use the yellow circuitry. And picture this. Of course, without thinking about it, remember. If ordinary people, if you at the ordinary level were suddenly deprived of all your enemies, at the very least, this, what in the world would happen to you? I will assume that all of you will now, no matter what the partnership wants to holler out, that you've got some doubt that everything would be coming up roses, that it would be heaven on earth. I will assume by now that all of you would suspect that something would be fishy, that things would not be as pleasant as might be describable in digital terminology. Is it possible for one to be in a state of terminal laid-backness? Could one mellow to death? Could one be so tolerant that one would die, that one would slide under the door of life's bathroom, never to be seen again? The reality of this permeates all of life's body. It does it all the way from the laws of physics, as I mentioned in passing. It does it to the conflicting political parties throughout the world, everywhere. We've been through this enough times. Everywhere you look, if anything is alive enough to be perceived by large segments of humanity, to be talked about, then it immediately is going to present itself in a binary fashion. Political parties, a tyrannical government, as opposed to the rebels, the latest avant-garde school of art, thought, philosophy, as opposed to the established school, the liberals versus the conservatives. Anything that is alive, you've got to be able to see by now, has an enemy. Whatever way you're wired up to look at it to begin with, that, oh yes, in this area, music, literature, politics, economics, in this area, I would put myself in X camp. The only reason that you can identify that you would put yourself in X camp is there is a Y camp. There is an enemy to your position. It goes all the way from the so-called laws of physics to that, to the fact that this partnership, the thing that seems to be oneself talking to oneself, what seems to be one's unconscious self, throughout that full spectrum, and certainly not ignoring religion, is a situation wherein everything is required to have an enemy. There could be no God without a devil. No one would strive to do better. Pardon me. No one would strive to, quote, do better, if there was not an enemy to doing better. What could you make of what I said was not as theoretical as might appear at first verbal blush? What would you make of being in a position wherein it's no longer required that you have an enemy, but then you understand that I need an enemy, that everybody needs an enemy? If someone would like to contact Solomon Burke and get him to change the words to that heroic song, is you have got to have an enemy or nothing happens. There is no action. What is the enemy to me doing this? You. Right now, what could it be? I should have asked the question first and given you my proverbial 5 seconds to ponder it. which I've never pointed this out, but if you can't ponder something in 5 seconds, fuck it. That should be your attitude. I know it's certainly mine. But I should have asked you, what is my enemy? Assuming that there is a reality that I know and experience from what I've been talking about all this time, that there is no requirement for me personally to have an enemy. Let's assume that that's true. But then for me to tell you that there is no action without an enemy, nothing, then I should have asked you, or I could have asked you, all right, everybody, right quick, think about it. What in some form would be my enemy? I'm using me in the sense of anyone doing this. See, if I'd given you 5 seconds, what would you have come up with? Dumb people, the ignorance of life, the low level of consciousness of ordinary humanity. They're not my enemy. They're not the enemy of this. If that were true, this would be no more than a religion. It'd be us against the infidels. That I have got the secret message, and these damn sons of bitches won't even listen. Well, either that or they are listening, and they don't want to hear about it. They're up to no good. I'm on the side of right. I'm on the side of evolution and progress and all good stuff. Whereas these people are shirkers. These people are not only marching to a different drummer, but the son of a bitch can't even keep a beat. They're not our sorts. They're my enemy. They're the enemy of this. If that were true, this would be a religion. And since it's not, and since none of you have that impression that such a thing is true, or if you do, get out. Then the question would have been back to what would be the enemy of me, of someone doing this? In the beginning, the enemy is you. Forget about the ignorance of humanity. It's you. Forget about the low level of awareness and understanding of everybody else. It's you. I don't have to go out in life and look. I know what's in life. Within the closed confines of here and that great television camera, the enemy at one level, one immediate level, is you. The day comes that is no longer sufficient. The day comes, if the day comes, I should be more specific to give myself a way out, which I publicly, without condition, will state if I can find a way out. But if the day comes that this has to take on a more public appearance, then I ask you a question, and you can have longer than 5 seconds to ponder this. Then, who will the needed enemy become? I will have to conjure up an enemy. There will have to be an enemy. There will have to be a figment. Will it be real enough? And you can stir it up. To go back to the stories, for me to elaborate on the apparent ordinary stories. I assure you that there are all the apologists, the acquaintances of Socrates. They had to go through the formality of this trial. They tried to give him a way out, then went through the apparent formality of it. I assure you that if he looked up there to the Senate and those that, in fact, wanted to let him go, or Jesus looking over at Pontius Pilate, if they saw that they were drifting off and began to yawn or, looking like, hurry up and we'll let you go, I assure you that more went on than you read about or more than you would normally read about, that they began to give them, they made an enemy. They insisted, you is my enemy, you just don't realize it. And you ain't gonna let me go. So you have to produce an enemy. It is necessary. You then need it. It's not simply required, you need it. There is not sufficient contact sport going on without it. Is this not a strange bundle of affairs? Does this not make Lewis Carroll sound like Julia Child. Does not Alice in Wonderland, compared to this, sound like a travelogue for Des Moines, Iowa? That the very things that seems to be driving ordinary people and tormenting them and upset me and got me here and made me travel across the country to see you, and I'm working toward to get over it, and it sounds like all my dreams. You gave me new terminology, but all my dreams of being an at-ease person, a tolerant person, a person who understands, a person who forgives, a person who has deep insight. And then suddenly the time comes that I have got to the point that I have no enemies, and you're going to tell me, then I got to produce them? I got to make them up? I got to cause them? Well, all right, if that's too much for you, I'll do it for you. If I do not find a way out, you stick around, and maybe in a magnanimous moment, I'll let you off and say, all right, you don't have to do it. I'll do it for you, and see how you like that. Or, of course, maybe I'll produce an enemy sufficient for all of us. That's known in the business as a blanket enemy. I'm going to leave this paragraph, but I assure you that there's a lot more than the little humors and things that apparently sounded as though it could be something theoretical in your future. There is a reality. There's something that you can learn from. There's something that you can begin to escape in the sense of creating a more liberal tolerance between you and the required enemies that you have at line level consciousness, you and everyone else. As I said, many, many of you have moments already stepping off the straight and narrow path that you do have some surcease from a feeling that I have enemies. It's a near mystical experience, that within itself. If not, if you don't want mystical experience, it's the best deep breath you ever had in your life. It's just suddenly, no one's my enemy, which is not synonymous with ordinary binary mystical experiences of, hey, I love the world. That's nothing. Because that, remember, all you got to do is kick the guy and he'll strangle you. But my description is better, even though it's still verbal. It's suddenly have no enemies, because if somebody comes up then and kicks you, you understand compulsive behavior as well as anybody else. You can feel like, hey, give me a few more minutes, or catch me next week, or I'll look you up next week when I'm in a bad mood, and hell, I'll give you a kick to make this one look like child's play. I understand that. But right now, what a breath. No enemies. But for action to take place, I'm talking about real action, to go any further, what seems to be progress in this, you have got to have an enemy. Everything's got to have an enemy. God's got to have an enemy. Moses, Jesus, Buddha, you, the president, all dictators, all underdogs, the person who might appear on some horizontal chart as to being the most mundane, inconsequential person in the world has an enemy. They got to have an enemy. Or else try to become a monk or a hermit or a Maytag repairman. But everybody else, you have got to have an enemy. And there is much more to it than just the verbalization that I have been involved with for the last 10 or 15 minutes. If you would like a place for me to push you, if you don't see a way to start grappling with this, is, let me refine what I was saying, is take the notion that humanity has always had, that life is put out in large continuing doses in human consciousness. That is, that a superior life, whether it was coming out through the guise of Judaism, Buddhist philosophy, Christian religion, some humanistic philosophies, secular philosophies, is this continuing message that life is put out through man, that we should not be hating each other. It vibrates throughout the system of the majority of humanity when they hear that under their particular circumstances, in their right time zone. Yeah, that's true. Even though the behavior does not fit yet. But life still sends that message through humanity, and the majority of humanity vibrates and is touched by it in a positive fashion. That, yeah, we should not have enemies. We've got to stop this. And it's not true. So there's a place to start, is what is life up to? To continually put out this message that even sounds right to me. It sounds right to me even sitting here right now. Listening to you talk, it sounds right to say that the way to be, or one absolutely, for a certain aspect of a better person, a more advanced person, a person of greater understanding would be that they have no enemies. That's true and it's not true. They don't require it anymore, but they need it. They would have to produce their own artificially. The people involved, the enemy wouldn't understand it, which shows you how dumb D is compared to C, which shows you how dumb the devils are compared to the gods, which of course all the stories have been telling you that. Of course, that's because we all think we're on the sides of the gods. Which of course we are. But you're on nobody's side. You are dead unless you have an enemy. I'll leave it for tonight, if not forever. I got another one. Refer back to my mailbag. Several times a year, I get this. I get a letter from someone who heard about me, read something I wrote, whatever. And the gist of which I'm about to address myself is that the person says that they have always wanted to find a teacher, and they would like my advice, or they would like to have my opinion or my support or my direction. And perhaps they ask me about somebody specifically. What do I think of them? Or they may say, I don't know anybody living here in Idaho. Can you send me to somebody? Or should I move to England and try to track down Dr. So-and-so? But then they say, the reason I'm asking you, I have dreamed of this. I've even dreamed of coming to find you in the hoary confines and dark corners of Stone Mountain, Georgia, inside of a post office box. Which shows how small my needs are. They say that their greatest fear, after all these years, that they've thought about doing something, they've tried to arrange their life. They had their car all packed up with all their belongings once. They had a plane ticket to Norway. But then what always stops them is this, is the great fear that they're going to end up with a fake teacher. A fake leader of some kind. And of course, some of it is indirectly addressed to me. You know, like, you aren't one, are you? If I come find you, you're not going to try to be a fake teacher. Yeah. You know this is going somewhere besides just get an immediate laugh. That's not the point. Because in various ways, all of you have had that same kind of sensation, and sometimes in the past, or sometimes you right now seeing this or hearing this for the first few times, you may feel it even now. But there is something again to be learned of real consequence about how life operates, how you're only seeing the shadows of reality, how you're only seeing two legs of a three-legged creature that supports everything. What would be a, quote, fake teacher? What would be fake gods even? Let's take it, if you like that, another way. What if you said, or people said, I want to be religious. I want to be truly religious. And I've discounted Christianity and Judaism and everything that I grew up in this part of the world. And I've studied in books and et cetera. Buddhism, I don't like it. I think it's dead, and I've studied this and that. And I know God is still alive. And I'll be religious. Boy, I'll be religious as soon as, but I am not going to waste my time by worshiping fake gods. Several things I suggest that you try and neuralize. What is life up to that many people even have the concept of fake gods? Take your choice, whichever one strikes you the best way. Fake gods or fake living human teachers. Be they touched by the gods, be they just strange somebody like me, that some guru, some teacher. What is life up to that these people seem to appear? There seems to be a continuing market for it, but there is also a very widespread apparent interest and concern over the possibility of fake teachings, fake teachers. What is life up to? One consideration I would ask you to neuralize. A second one, what would be a fake teaching? What would be a false God? Now, at line level consciousness, you or other people could answer that and probably spend an hour, 100 pages written, 1,000 pages. But would this not truly be a fake teaching? Would be a teaching that you didn't get anything out of? What would be fake gods? Wouldn't it be gods that you worshipped and nothing happened? That I've worshipped these gods and I did everything I thought that made gods happy, and I'm not a damn bit better off. But at the horizontal level, is that the way it seems? Is that the way it's spoken about? No. No and no. It's not. Because then people take the responsibility, they take the blame. And of course, there are always rabbis, priests, salesmen, gurus, and swamis there to point out to you that now you're coming to your senses. And the person says, I have been following this teaching, I have been following this religion, I've been worshiping these gods, and I'm no better off and nothing's happened. It just shows I have not been doing it right, right? And the head guru goes, I haven't done it vigorously enough. I haven't done it with truly a pure heart. I haven't done it often enough. I haven't done it at the correct times. All right, at least the third consideration I would ask you to neuralize. If you followed the first two, then why would anybody even ask? Why would anybody be, even binarily speaking, irrational enough then to worry, is a teaching going to be false? Is this a fake teacher that I'm about to take up with? All right. If the first or the second thing I pointed out to you is correct, which it is, as always, that people do not see the way I'm pointing it out, that a fake teaching from any reasonable viewpoint would be that which does not benefit you. And not into the area about, well, it seems to benefit other people, so I must not be doing it right. Or I must not have tried hard enough. Well, you can say that. At the binary level, you could defend it. You could describe to me how you did not try hard enough. All right. But still you're left with what I started to point out, that if you were my reasonably fictitious and sane man, you would still agree that the teaching, the religion, is fake if it doesn't help you know who. If you were my fictitious, reasonable, insane man, who else do you care whether the teaching helps? People correctly drawn to this are not humanitarians at heart. I heard that this particular teaching, I heard that this particular thing was a fraud from the beginning. But I looked into it, and I got something out of it. My fictitious, reasonably insane man, he might not ever say anything, but he would then have some better viewpoint about what would be a fake and what is a not fake. A final consideration I would ask you to neuralize. What if the people, including yourselves at a certain level, who are worried about getting involved, wasting their time, spending effort, really trying and following this teacher or this teaching, and it turns out to be fake? But what about this? What if along the way, which, admit it now, this is probably correct, if they applied themselves at all for 6 or 8 months, a year, they'd get some benefit. Some benefit. Now, surely all of you know this by now. If they just went and met, if you just went and joined a church that you'd never been a part of, and you went once a week, over a period of a few months, and you really tried to do what they did, as much as they tried, as much as an ordinary person would try, to live by their rules, to go there when they met, sing when they sang, clap your hands when they did, and you joined them. Within a few months, if somebody said, have you benefited from it? Have you gotten anything out of it? Trust me. Almost everybody would say, yeah. You know, I've gotten something out of it. All right. Now my question is this, and it turns out to be fake. What are you going to do with the benefits you got? That you got some benefits, but then somebody announces to you, we've been around here longer than you have, and we found out for sure this thing is fake. In some way, it comes to your attention, your nervous system responds in a way to accept, wait a minute, this thing is fake. Then what are you going to do with the apparent, so-called, benefits you have already received? The new understanding, the new tolerance, the new perception. And then you find out the source of this was fake. Then what are you going to do with the apparently quite real benefits that you had already received? But look how serious it appears. Look how serious some of you took it in the beginning. And hardly any of you are in a position to actually laugh at other people's concern, although you have a different view of it now. But how serious it is that people do not want to get caught up into a fake teaching. I tried, at least in a two-dimensional verbal manner, in the Red Book, I believe the Dialogues of Gurdjieff. One of them I presented a story which I was attempting to take this fluffy dream, fluffy croissant type concern over a fake teaching, and I attempted to stick a double-barrel shotgun in it and pull the trigger. And that was, if any of you remember the story, about the guy who was supposedly a teacher, and then one day called in the apparent students and said, hey, this is all a fake. I made it all up. I'm an idiot. I'm insane. None of this is true. I just made it up, and I'm so sorry for it now. I've got to admit it. I'm going to tell you, all of you just run for your lives. Get out of here. I'm glad I finally made a clean breast of it. And they all left except one guy, and he said, I told you. I just made it all up. It's a fake. You know, get out of here. And the guy said, hey, it's too late. I'm almost enlightened. That sure is funny, isn't it? And at least once a year, I have these letters about people wanting my advice or some kind of support, some kind of comment about their possible involvement with a fake teacher. Is then somebody, at least once a year, will just point blank ask me if I'm some kind of fake. And if not, how can I prove otherwise? I can't remember what I write those people back now. Well, I was trying to remember whether I ever answer any of those people, and if so, what is it I say to them? But what is life up to that is such a weighty and serious concern? It's not funny at that level. But what if I got caught up into something that was fake? They don't carry it this far, as the last consideration I ask you to try and neuralize for them. What if I not only got caught up in something that was fake, what if I got along the way somewhere and was actually benefiting from it and then found out it was a fake? I know this. My memory's this good. I have never answered that question. I have never responded to that because I have no requirement for ordinary enemies, and there's no need for me to make anybody mad. I think I will conclude by something that strikes me periodically, and it struck me again, to ask you, you listen, I assume all of you, to contemporary music. It could be now, it could have been contemporary music 30 years ago if you were your own parents. Literature, but right now I guess most of you people get your exposure to music, through music, to this sort of thing. But what, just out in the ordinary world, what is more delightful than real fired up, sex hormones spinning out love sonnets to women? So many of you believe that you have a continuing problems in sexual relationships and you can't find a woman now that you're halfway to the state of enlightenment, that nobody can catch up with you. Of course, it's good that you men don't know what women has thought about men in general. Forget being involved with this. But just listen. Sometimes it comes out in a greater degree in the frenzied years of little teenagers that hadn't had, so to speak, any experience to speak of. And yet you hear these sex-craved molecules and hormones making these little pimple-faced people sing out about "my girl is so wonderful." I swoon. Just the marvels of the sex hormones in men, just singing of the absolute delights. I would kill myself. I'd even sell my car. Just to see her. I just think about her and I just want to fall on the floor and kick my feet. I just thought I'd leave us on a happier note than perhaps some of you deserve.